And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Bigfoot Odyssey. It's a late show. I'm your host, Kerry, and I'm by my lonesome. Brad's having some issues with one of his dogs. He raises and rescues Vizslas, and one of his older Vizslas is not doing really well. So he's not in the best of humor. And I know some of you that talk to him might want to reach out to him. He's just not in a good place. Those are his kids. But man, I really thought about when I was doing this who all I reached out to, and who all either works for Bigfoot Odyssey or works with Bigfoot Odyssey. And of course, myself and Linda, I count that as one. Daniela produces. Brad co-hosts with me on Fridays. Iron Dogger, Miss Jackie, she's our new co-host on Sundays with Daniela. Jimmy Barr, he's got his YouTube channel, Forest Giants. If you guys haven't checked that out. Wes Germer, Sasquatch Chronicles, Brent Thomas, Mark Newbill, Sawdust Beast. Brent is Paranormal Portal. I got to think, wow, a lot of people do actually help us out here. And I reached out to all of Mark Zasky, Crypto Reality. I reached out to all of them, and everybody's busy. So it's just lonesome old me. But I got two guests tonight. James and Bobby Green, actually, last names have been changed to protect the innocent. And these gentlemen are not showing their faces tonight. And we are definitely sensitive to that. James's wife is a doctor. And sad but true, this is a very sensitive subject. And we're not all equally situated. So it unfortunately, the subject, as it were, can have an effect on people's lives, especially family. Family's the worst at making fun of you, really. So we definitely understand, but we appreciate you gentlemen joining us tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Bobby and James, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no problem.
No problem.
Welcome to be here.
Yep, my pleasure.
Now, James, I had spoken to you on the phone about your experience, and then, of course, we had gotten a hold of Bobby and said he had some experiences too, and would come on and talk to us about it. But James, you had your experience in Mississippi. You want to just kind of I know you had several, and actually not very far as the crow flies from where I had my experience, was it?
Right. That's correct. I actually had an experience down in Copiah County. Also, north of that, couple hours in Carroll County. Had a couple of cryptid experiences there. When I was a teenager, I grew up fishing and hunting like most kids in Mississippi. And I was in a particular area on family property that hadn't been inhabited in probably 50 years or so, this particular area. I went in to deer hunt at the time. I think I had a shotgun. And I climbed up in a cedar tree that was pretty thick. I was in a thick area. There was a ravine probably maybe 40 yards in front of me. And I knew the deer would come out of those areas, and I would try to ambush when they came through. And again, I was a teenager, so I had some different theories about hunting. So I was in the thicket, and all of a sudden it kind of got quiet. And I noticed a couple squirrels came and got on the limb next to me, which was odd. I never had that happen before. They were sitting there. And all of a sudden I started hearing something coming out of the ravine, and it circled me. And it sounded like a Clydesdale horse on two legs. You know what I mean? It was heavy. It wasn't a deer. It wasn't a bear. Doesn't move like that. And it was making a lot of noise, and it was something and kind of circling me, going back and forth, probably about 40 yards from me. Out of my eyesight, I couldn't see it through the thicket, but I could hear it. And after a while, it kind of went back the way it came, and I eased down out of that cedar tree and I fell back down. That was my first experience as a teenager. And then fast forward 20 years, I'm down there again in another area on bow hunting, and had a nice food plot set up, sitting in the tree about maybe 10 or 15 yards in the air above the food plot. I see what I think is a black lab coming in my food plot. And I don't know, Primos, the company Primos had this can, sounds like a fawn bleat. And
Yeah, that's what I
that.
used.
Right, I was using that. And that's when I saw this lab coming in. At the time, I wasn't wearing glasses. And so I gave it about 10 or 15 minutes, ease through the plot. And when it got me, I realized it wasn't a lab. It was a Black Panther. And
Oh, wow.
I didn't have a gun. I didn't have a gun at that time, because I was bow hunting. I had a Matthews bow. I drew back, looked at it, and when I drew back, it looked up at me, and I just froze, and I didn't shoot it. Looking at it from the top, it was only like maybe a foot wide across the back, if that. But from the top of his back to the bottom of his stomach was like 3 feet. It was massive.
A big cat.
Yeah, it was a big cat. It was about 5 foot long with a long tail.
James, your internet is breaking up on us just a little bit. I don't know if you might have anything else. And there's a fruit fly that is. It's so dark in here, and this is the only light. So he was in the kitchen. So I saw this light, and now he's after the light on my screen. And if you see me swatting like I'm doing some kung fu, that's what that is. So, but yeah, maybe you want to check and see if you have. Ooh, there he is. Almost had him. If you have anything else hooked up to your internet, and this usually doesn't take that much, especially when you're not streaming video. But it's just every now and then we're getting just a little bit of a click out. But that's interesting when you mentioned the Primos can call, because I can recall this one area that I would go to, and almost every single time I would hit that, something would just come crashing through the woods at me. And of course, in my mind, it's a buck. Everything was always this huge buck that I just couldn't beat. He was just beating me. I'm not getting him on camera. I had 5 game cameras out there. I mean, I was pretty well thought I had tracked every single deer that was out there. But this one he just wouldn't come out. He was only, I hunted at night for this thing which didn't exist actually for like years. But I would hit that can, just that just like that. And I mean, it dozen times this happened. Just crashed through the woods straight toward me, because where I would sit, I could see all out in the clear to my right, and I had a grass patch down below me with and I would put out corn, or I would have a feeder. I did different things throughout the years. But I was sitting on the edge of a tree line, and I could see into the edge of the creek bottom, going into the woods, and then everything below me and to my left was all thicket. And it was 80 feet thick easily, before it got anywhere clear going down into that creek bed. And just coming from that direction, almost the same direction every time, just something crashing, breaking limbs. And realistically, that is just not what bucks do. Bucks they might get mad, but they're not going to break limbs and, little things like that I feel like I should have noticed over the years, that I had these creatures around me instead of a monster buck. But just interesting when you mentioned that just brought that back. Fishing to kill a fly. Missed it. But what about growing up? What did you? We talked about that. What did you heard growing up?
Yeah, I actually grew up north and then moved down for junior high and high school. So when I got down there, one of my great uncles, he was an elderly gentleman, would talk to me because I spent a lot of time fishing and hunting and stuff in the woods. And he would say to me, hey, when you're out there, if you hear something strange, throw a stick. Like if you're going over hill, throw a stick. And if it comes back the other way, he referred to him as Hank. He would say there's Hanks out there. Yeah, and that's what they called him. And I didn't know what he was talking about.
I had heard that growing up too. Bobby, what about you growing up? You remember hearing things like that?
Well, growing up, unlike you guys, I grew up here in Tennessee, a county called Wilson County, in between Nashville and Cookeville. Growing up, I was very enthused, and as I was telling James just the other day, I remember being in second grade, and my very first book report was on Bigfoots, and
Nice.
and my mom and dad thought they was strange that I would do my first book report on Bigfoot. But my grandfather, as I was telling James earlier today, as kids, all our parents worked, worked 9 to 5, and my grandparents were were the ones that were retired, and they did all the grandkid watching. So all my cousins and everybody was dropped off at my grandparents during the day, and we'd be there until our parents picked us up, and it would be like 7, 8 of us. And I always remember my grandfather telling me and telling us, when it starts to get dark, make sure you're at the front of the house. And I never understood why until one day when the unexpected happened. Uh, he would always tell us, "Hey, make sure you're not in the backyard when it starts to get dark, and make sure you're out front where there's lights." And there was only light. There was only one
Uh-oh.
light. Uh, there was only one light that was at the front of the house, and at the back of the house, it was only like a back porch light. And I remember that day, uh, we was all in the house, and my grandmother, and she was in the kitchen cooking dinner for everybody. And I never forget that she came into the living room. I mean, just the white of her eyes, I could just see. I just remember it like it was just yesterday. And she like, "Is everybody here? Where is everybody?" And we're like, "What are you talking about? Where's everybody here?" And she like, "Yeah." She started counting everybody in the room, and there was one of my cousins were missing. And she like, "Where's Nikki?" And we said, "Where she is, she's in the bathroom." So she went and got Nikki out of the bathroom, and next thing you know, she goes and tells my grandfather, uh, "Hey, uh, AC, do you have your shotgun?" And he said, "Why?" Because he is at the back window, and we're thinking to ourselves, who is he? And that's something my grandfather would always tell us that, well, tell me, he would tell the older kids, never be in the backyard because he is out there, or him is out there. And it was never a name of the person or whatever he was talking about. And she said he's at the kitchen window, and he jumped up, got his shotgun. He didn't go out the back door. He went out the front door and walked around to the back of the house. And we was all sitting there in the living room, all in a, all together, and didn't know what was going on. And, we from ages from 7 to 12 years old, just kind of scared because we didn't know what was going on.
Sure.
So he comes back into the house, and he said, "There's nothing out there. I don't see him." And she said, "Well, I promise you, he was at the back window. I seen his face." And that night, we all went to bed. My grandmother and grandfather came into all the rooms and told us not to look out the windows. And that night, I could actually hear something walking around the house, and everyone was in the house. And my grandmother had come into our bedroom, to the guest bedroom, where with me and 3 of my cousins all in the same bed. And she said, "Do not look out that window, no matter what you hear." So that in itself,
She knew.
she knew what was out there.
Well, she knew what would happen if you saw it.
Right, exactly. So as I got older, I guess I was probably 12, 13 years old, going into junior high school. Uh, my grandfather pulled me to the side one day. He said, "Hey," he said, "I just want to tell you something. I know you're one of the oldest, and you probably understand this, but uh, that you remember that day, we was in the house. I had to go outside, and you just, you're a little bit younger." I was like, "Yeah, I remember. I remember like it's just yesterday." I said, "You never did tell us what was going on." He's like, "Well, believe it or not, I know you're interested in Bigfoots, but I think we have a Bigfoot here in our county." And I said, "Are you serious, Granddad?" He said, "Yes, I'm very serious." He said he's been back there for years, ever since I was a little kid. And at that time, my grandfather was, probably almost 60 years old. And he said he would come to their house and do the same at night. He will only come at night. 'Cause my grandfather, he had pigs and guineas and turkeys, chickens, and I mean he had the whole 9 yards, cows. And I remember some of the pigs would come up missing at times, the smaller pigs. And
Hmm.
he would just say somebody stole it, never would say it was a Bigfoot or whatever the case may be. But as he came out and told me, he said those things that happen around our property is, and that's, he doesn't have a name. I just called it him. I didn't want to scare you or the kids, your other cousins, but there is a Bigfoot on our property. And to this day, all that land has been cleared out. His home's there now. But back then, it was a little small town, and it was a whole lot of wooded area. So to this day, I really do believe what he said.
Well, you're talking about Tennessee. I mean,
Yes.
and realistically, there's probably more than one. It's probably a whole family group, maybe a couple.
Mhm.
And you just had one of those in the family that would come up in the yard, get a pig, feed the family, look in the window. Apparently, this seems to be one of the things they like to do. At least maybe the younger ones do. I wouldn't know for sure. It's just part of what we hear. Is just
Mhm.
come up to the window and look in to watch kids, especially
Mhm.
something
Yeah.
about kids they want to watch. I don't know if it's just pure entertainment for them or if they're just waiting for an opportunity. Who knows? I wouldn't. I certainly wouldn't risk uh, either way.
Right.
Your grandparents knew, especially your grandmother had to know that if you kids saw a creature like this peeking into the window, what it was going to do
Mhm.
to you
Right.
psychologically.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Monsters, they can be used, I guess, just the idea that there could be something out there, whether you think your grandparents are messing with you or not, is still in your
Mhm.
head. They put that in your head that there could be something, some big hairy monster out there to get me. The thing is, it's true. Whether they get you or not, I don't know. But them being there, it's absolutely
Three.
true. These stories didn't just come from nowhere. They've been handed down from one to the next to the next. Your grandparents probably did them the exact same way.
Mhm.
But the psychological damage of seeing one of these creatures as a child, I can imagine, especially when you don't even know who you are yet, and then
Right. Exactly.
this staunch reality hits you. What else could possibly be real then? I can what this does to a child. Miss KDG, she saw one when she was a kid, and it really had a profound effect on her. It affects her to this day. She sends me pictures all the time, or not all the time, but has sent pictures before. Just she's riding down the road, had seen something cross the road on into some hay bales, took a picture, and looks like there's something there to me. Because she took a picture later on, and whatever was there is not there, and it was huge. So, but it's good that I think that she has that awareness. And I think it's good for anybody to have that awareness, whether you actually believe they exist or not. Just being aware, I think, is a good thing. I don't think anybody should be afraid to go hiking or camping or just take a stroll down by the lake. But if you're aware of the possibility, I don't think it will have that lasting effect, at least not on an adult, that sudden moment of realization can actually give you. Um, Now, was that the only experience you had ever had with them, Bobby, or have you had any other experiences hunting?
No, other than, as we were kids, when we would go out in the woods, my grandfather wouldn't know we was back there. Is, the things we would hear at times. As you know, the knocking noise, and we would always
Yes.
think there was probably, some hunters back there, or whatever the case may be, because a lot of people hunted on his property, and we would always hear a knocking noise. And as I got older, as a teenager, I told my grandfather we used to go back in the woods, and he's like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "Yes, we did." And I told him about the knocking noise, and he said yes. He said he would do that all the time to get our attention. That he would do that once he got close to give us, let him know that he was close. And my grandfather would always stand out on the edge of the property throughout the day and just kind of just stare into the woods. And you know, like I said, I never understood why until today he told me why he did all those things.
Well, it's definitely understandable. I can't. Sorry, this is when you're by yourself. This is a little bit difficult because I can barely pay attention to the chat, and I'm trying to listen to you guys. There's a reason we have two that do this show, but just trying to keep it going. So, James, after you had your experience, how did that affect you going back into the woods?
To be honest with you, it really didn't affect me that much when I had the encounter from the cedar tree. Because I mean, I was a pretty tough hunter, you know, because I never saw it. I just you know, I was kind of like, what is that? You know what I mean? And I knew to get out of there, but I didn't really. I guess because I was a teenager, it didn't really affect me. That I was more affected by the panic because I didn't have a gun and I was a mile away from my truck and it was getting dark, you know. And I figured out, should I stay in the tree all night or get down? You know, those type of thoughts were coming through my head, and I finally decided the best thing to do was to use my military experience and get down out of the tree, follow where he went to see exactly where he was, and that's what I did. And I got probably 100 yards from the tree, and I could see his head sticking out from behind the tree. I saw the eyes and eye shine and everything. I had my light, and that's when I started backing up. I just backed up all the way out of the bottom into the open field. Once I made it to the open field, that's when I ran. And I was pretty shaken up after that.
You kind of broke up a little bit. When you got to the open field, what happened?
Yeah, when I got to the open field, that's when I actually ran. Okay. I started running for the truck. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that feeling too. Been there.
Yeah.
The last thing I did hunting was run out of the woods. And
right.
That was 14 years ago. So you've both obviously looked into this subject, Bobby, since you did your second grade report on this. What do you think these creatures are? James, let's start with you. What do you think they are, man? Is this a relic hominid? Is this part human? What?
I think it's a hominid. I think it's a primitive hominid. That's what I think it is.
What kind of leads you to that?
Just when I'm kind of a data guy. When you look at the data, you can go all the way back to the drawings and dates of them. You can go back to all of the photographs, all of the data, all of the communication that they exist across the world. So, in my mind, based on the data alone, footprint, dermal ridges on feet, it's a living, breathing, primitive hominid, in my opinion.
Bobby, what do you think?
Me, myself, I really, you know, probably on the same basis what you all just spoke on. But to me, you know, more of a primitive man. You know, the encounters that, you know, you hear other people having of the chatter and the talking, you know, I know we have a lot of primitive apes that communicate, but, you know, from what I hear in the videos and the sound bites that I've heard of the chatter and the talking, there's no primitive ape that can do that.
Right.
And you know, what just everything you see online and the videos and the encounters, I mean, everyone can't be wrong.
Yeah, more than 15,000 reported sightings just since 1995. That's 26 years. You're talking about, that's just what's been reported. And I mean, what percentage of sightings get reported? I think maybe 5% have to be. You know, when people talk about population, you know, we hear a lot of numbers. I've heard 4,000, 5,000. And what I don't think a lot of people consider when they come out with these numbers is scale and the sheer vastness of just the United States, not counting Canada and Mexico, and just how big this place is. And if you look at populations of other animals, always go to white-tailed deer. There's 30 million white-tailed deer. That's not counting every other kind of deer that there is in the United States. 30 million. And how often do you see one of those? When you're looking for them.
Mm-hmm.
And you're talking about a deer is not self-aware. First, we don't think they are anyway, not emotionally intelligent. We don't believe, maybe to a degree. A mama might come back looking for a baby, but that's more of a protective instinct, I think. It's just there, to me, there could be 1 million of these creatures or more, maybe 2 million. Because when you're talking about a creature that is, first, probably extremely intelligent, especially in their own environment, predisposed to hiding. What I mean is, this is not something they're taught. I believe it is born in them. I think if they were taught all these things, they'd make a lot more mistakes. And they just don't seem to make any. When people come around, these creatures embed themselves into the environment. And I think they'll watch you from 10 feet away through the bush. They know you're not going to go into. I think they know us well enough to know where we will and won't go. And as people, we're not comfortable in the woods. We stumble and bumble through. Even the best woodsmen out there still, by comparison, are stumbling and bumbling through the woods. We're very easily patterned. We're going to walk through the clearest path we can find. It's hardly anyone is going off trail, even hunters to this day. My brother-in-laws, which I think I'm starting to flip maybe a little bit, that I'm at least getting them paying attention when they're in the woods. But they've always said it. They've said it to me for at least the last 5 years, that I've been out here my whole life, country boys. I ain't never seen nothing like that. I ain't around here. If there was, I would have seen it. And that's the thing, that most people that don't really believe Sasquatch exists, that's kind of the mindset, the mentality, putting their own human limits on something that they don't even believe exists. And that's always my argument to them. I said, so you think if Sasquatch exists, you should have seen it? Well, yeah, I would have seen the thing up walking through the woods if it was around here. I was like, see, you're assuming things about a creature you don't even believe exists. And I think this is where most people go in their head, because of the pictures they've seen. Patterson Gimlin, that thing was walking across. Patty, she was walking across the beach. The Paul Freeman footage, that guy was just kind of slowly lumbering out. The one I saw was walking through the woods, but he wasn't just out in the open. He was still being slick and hiding. And these gnats, they're driving me nuts. But the point I'm trying to get to, if I don't completely forget and lose my mind because of these gnats, is we don't know. Most people don't know enough about them. They assume a lot of things, that if they exist, this is what should be happening. But what they're not considering is not just the human element of this creature, and that their whole survival depends on them not being discovered. This is why we don't find their bodies, I believe. They're not going to leave one of their dead around for us to go find. I say this all the time. If they're trying to remain hidden, because they would be busted at that point. Just having that ability to work things out. This is the only thing that seems evident to me. And I think if more people look at the subject from the standpoint that they do exist, and you ask yourself these questions: why don't we have a body? Why don't we have a clear picture of one? Well, they must not be real. Okay. If you don't have that to fall back on, then what are the answers? If they actually are real, and you can convince someone, okay, these creatures are real. Now ask yourself this question: why don't we have a good image? Well, they're just not coming out in the open where you can see them for the most part. I think a lot of encounters most encounters people have in the woods, hunters especially, it's by accident. A hunter actually going off trail, or maybe calling one up, or upsetting one, crossing that line. And that's another thing. It's not knowing that line. What level of tolerance does this particular individual have, and what am I going to do to breach it? I think that should be a consideration for any hunter that actually believes Sasquatch is out there. Be careful, because there might be something you can do. I did it, and I believe wholeheartedly that's what happened. And then you have the instances, excuse me, Bobby, like you had growing up. Curiosity, this thing wanting to look in the window and see what's going on. The property where I had my experience, the landowner now, which is Mr. Garway McGee's son, Daniel, I drove up there after 11 years. He knew exactly who I was. But when he was a kid, he had told me, him and some of his cousins, he was 15 years old, right down that hill in that bottom on the side of the house, had seen what they called at the time a tall gorilla. And it was just standing there looking at them, and they ran fast as they could home, crying, screaming, coming up the driveway, telling mom and dad what they had seen. That's why I firmly believe that at least Mr. McGee knew something, because there was always knocking going on. When we talked to people that lived around there was plenty of knocking all the time. But one man I talked to, that he wouldn't let me get him on camera, talked about hearing screams, something that he didn't recognize. I asked him about panthers. He said, no, this is no panther. This is something with big lungs, making a really loud, like a big man. He said maybe a man with a megahorn out there making a loud scream, but it wouldn't last very long. But it would just, they would hear it every now and then. Coyotes would go off, and he said we'd hear something else scream. And then I kind of brought up, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, and he didn't have anything to say after that. So that conversation was over. But it's interesting to me how people will delude themselves when they don't want to really acknowledge that these beings, these creatures are out there. But I think if you ever see it, if you ever get to lay eyes on it, and there's no question what you've seen, it's going to change your life. It's going to change you forever. And I think that's what my brother-in-laws actually worry about, is that.
I agree.
That they're going to get scared out of the woods.
Yeah.
Do you guys hunt today? Do y'all hunt now?
I
do. Yeah.
James, you still hunt?
Yes, I still hunt and fish.
I do not hunt at all.
I'm with you, Bob.
I do not hunt at all. James and I has had a conversation, and we had agreed we were going to go down to Mississippi during turkey season of next year, during spring, and go on his property and just walk around. And that's going to be my very first experience of being in an area that's been known contact. And I'm looking forward to that, just to hear his stories in person and being on that property where he's experienced these things that happened to him as a kid.
So you're gonna be on the lookout then. Turkey season, you don't expect to run into anything,
right?
During the winter, during deer season, you can kind of expect to see all kind of stuff since food gets scarce. But turkey season, you don't really expect to see anything but turkeys, really, and to see something like that. So I hope you don't really have that have a bad experience, but you're gonna have your head on a swivel, I can imagine.
Oh yes, most definitely.
Turkey season is when I had my second experience. Yeah.
All right. Let's take some questions from the chat. If you have a question for Bobby or James or myself, post it in the chat. Put it in all caps for me, please, so I can pick it out. I am by myself. No one's producing tonight. Carrie, everyone's an expert, but we are not experts. I believe, but no one knows. I think that's absolutely true. Oh, we lost Bobby. Maybe we'll get him back.
I agree.
Yeah, we hear, I'm sorry, Pearls, if you can post it up again. I kind of lose it after 25. And if there's a lot of people commenting, I kind of lose them. It seems there's Bobby back.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. You got to swap positions a little bit.
Yeah.
We hear a lot of things. There are a lot of people that make a lot of broad claims about the subject. And to me, because people are not stupid, there's people that look into this subject. And I think if these researchers would just be honest, just be transparent about what you're getting, of course, give your opinions. But when someone comes up talking about Sasquatch breeding habits, or they say, well, and I'll give you a recording. I heard this at a conference. A guy gets up and he plays this recording and calls it a mating call. And I'm thinking, man, what happened for him to know that's a mating call? What?
Yeah.
And that they migrate. They go this far for so long and come back. And most people kind of go along to get along because they don't want to upset anyone. But, that's a trend that needs to be broken. We need to start asking the tough questions. Start holding people's feet to the fire. Start asking why. How do you know this? Well, how did you come up with this? And I can promise you 99.9% of the time, it's going to all circle back to, well, it's just my opinion. But that's not how it gets asserted.
Right.
That these creatures they can see you from so far away in the dark. And there's so many things. I heard one researcher say that Bigfoot come down from the higher elevations around dark and hunt about a mile apart from each other. It's just disingenuous to make claims like that. There's just no way to know. Think about what it would take to know something like that. First, you would have to have someone observing them, which is just not happening. No one is observing these creatures, especially without them knowing you're there. Then you'd have to know what it was doing was hunting. Then you'd have to have somebody else a mile away watching another one do the same thing, know it was related, and then it would have to be repeated to know it was something that they do and not just something that they did. So it's these things, it's these broad claims and these exact things, people telling you about Sasquatch, what they do and what they don't do, when we can't even get a clear picture of one. We can't get a picture good enough to even prove to people that they're out there. But there are these, Shannon LeGros, love her to death, called it the Dances with Wolves syndrome, that these people they're Kevin Costner and they've infiltrated the tribe and now they know all the secrets. And so I'm not sitting here trying to rail on researchers, but what I'm asking you as viewers to start doing is to start holding these people's feet to the fire. Start asking them how they know these things. Get that part of it out of them, because if we can stop this, I think we can get more people actually taking the subject seriously, because it just kind of discredits these people trying to sound like they're experts and wanting to get people to follow them. If you just be honest and say, hey, and look, I kind of get it, that after doing this for 20 years and you haven't really learned a whole lot about the creature, they just don't give you that much other than, things that are left behind. There's not a lot of direct interaction with these creatures unless it's on their terms. And I think for researchers, that's hardly ever. It's usually from a distance that something's happening. But I understand that belief is a very powerful inception. We say that all the time too, that once you become ingrained in something and you feel it to the core, that this is what's happening, that's kind of how it comes out, that this is how it is. But I think from listening to so many stories and encounters, especially for the last 3 or 4 years, that you just can't, it's just not something that's universal. These creatures seem to be so different from one another, not only the way they look, but the way they behave from one place to the next. There's no reason, even if you watched a clan of them for 20 years and you knew everything about this clan, to be able to put those behaviors and tendencies on every Sasquatch everywhere. It's just not that way. That's why we like hearing people coming on talking about their encounters and what's happened to them. A lot of people are here just looking for confirmation. Confirmation is one of those things that actually feels good. So if they
Kerry,
go ahead.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
With your past history of everything you've been doing and the research and the encounters you've been hearing, for that person that has not had the encounter, how have they become a believer? What do you think has made them think, okay, it must really be something out there? What has just made them that light just to turn on for them?
What I've heard mostly, it's the anecdotes. It's the person that comes on here and they're sincere. They have zero to gain. They're not trying to get there like you gentlemen are not. You're trying to keep someone from knowing you. So it's not for notoriety's sake. You have nothing to gain out of coming forward at all. And so I think it's the individual. There are a few pictures out there that are pretty good, I think, that was at least closely resemble what I had seen, but I've only ever seen one really good. And he might be the only one out there that looks like him. I mean, I've got a picture of one that looks pretty close to him. Same, he's at least the same style as this one. But I think that's it. I think it's the antidote. It's the sincerity. You can hear it in someone's voice. You can pick up on. Most people have a pretty decent BS meter.
Right.
And when you hear people talk in their seriousness about what happened to them, the amount of detail, how it affected them, going forward from their experience, how it changed them, the way they are now. I think that's it. That's the main thing. The main way is just from listening to other stories or listening to someone else tell someone else's encounter, because some people just can't do it. That's why you've got Dixie Cryptid, Buckeye Bigfoot, Steve Isdall, these people telling other people's stories for them is just as important, I think, as someone else coming on, because not everybody wants to do that. They want their story out there. They want it to be heard, and they want people to believe them. But when you hear, there's just so much ridicule still in this subject. We just need more people paying attention. I think that's why we push awareness here. I believe that is a game we can win. We can win that game. We're not going to be able to prove Sasquatch exists to anybody. But if we can get people, you don't have to believe to be aware, just paying attention to what's going on around them, that I think more people are going to have their own experience. And if that happens, we don't have to convince them of anything. They're in it. And they're going to be paying attention and listening to others' experiences because, like I said, people want confirmation of what happened to them, just so they know they're not crazy.
Right.
For the most part. But I think that's it.
Okay.
Here's something in caps right here. Carrier, would you rather have not seen what you saw? I think there's a lot of things I could have done differently, and I think I wouldn't be here right now. But being this far away from it, kind of glad it happened, but it had to happen the way it did. If I would have just seen it walking through the woods, I would have been able to explain it away. But the way it happened and the circumstances involved in it, because I don't think it would have happened to anyone else, but because it was me in that spot, they had seen me in there for so long, they just knew me. They knew me. And when I was doing something different, hunting past deer season, hunting turkeys that I hadn't done before, a lot of things differently, camoing out the way I had, because I didn't camo out like that to deer hunt. I just think all those things triggered something. So I'm glad it happened now, just because I think it's a worthy cause. I think awareness is actually a worthy cause. And Helen Keller said true happiness is not in self-gratification, but in the fidelity to a worthy cause. So I'm happy doing this. I actually do it for me. And the fact that we get to do it not for ourselves, but for the subject is satisfying to me. So yeah, I'm glad. I am glad that it happened, actually. Let's see. Jay McManus says, if the guests have children, what will they tell them about these creatures? That's a good question. James, what will you tell your kids?
I've been open and honest with my children. Actually, I had an experience with my son in the woods down there in Copiah County, as I mentioned earlier, where we were walking through the woods and we started hearing trees pushed over. And I shared with him my thoughts on it, because I didn't want him to experience what I experienced in being surprised by turkey hunting and hearing something mimicking an owl and those types of things. I wanted him to be aware so that he could protect himself.
There you go. Bobby, what will you tell your kids?
Well, I've already told my kids. I have two daughters, and one is think that I'm crazy, and the other believes me. She actually is almost a Bigfoot fanatic herself, like I am, and she reads about them. She watches, TV shows about them, and she's very interested in the things I'm interested in when it comes to Bigfoot. So I'm kind of glad of that. At least one of them believes me.
Yeah, no, it's important that your
Yeah.
kids don't think you're just trying to pull the wool over their eyes.
Right.
And that's why I think there's shows, whatever you like to listen to, Sasquatch Chronicles, where you're listening to people tell their stories or listening to someone else tell a story for them. These are all things that have happened. I have a tendency to believe everybody that tells me they've seen one, because I'm not going to tell you didn't see it when I've seen it. Can't do that. Here we go. Jamie Cotterill said, did Bobby's grandfather tell of any encounters that he experienced?
Well, yes, he did. As a child, at my great grandmother's house was on right below the property where we lived at, and it was an older home. She had passed away. She lived to be 106 years old, and my grandfather still took care of the property. And I remember him telling me about a story that, when he was a kid, they had like a salt house. And I don't know if you all know what a salt house is. Back in the days when they would kill the hogs, they would take the meat and hang it up in a little wooden house where there were big blocks of salt, and they would cure the ham. And his experience was that he was out there one night checking on the meat. His father had told him to go out and make sure that the door was locked. And his experience was he seen something, a shadow that he thought that was his father outside with him when his father was not. And he said he went into the salt house, came back out, and the shadow was right there at the side of the home, standing up, looking at him. And I asked my grandfather, I said, well, do you think it could have been somebody else? He said, no. He said, not on our property. It couldn't be no one else. And he went back into the house, and he told his father what he just seen. And he said, did he talk to you? And my grandfather said, no, he did not talk to me. And I said, what do you mean by that, Granddaddy? He said, well, they chatter. They don't talk, they chatter. And he told me this as a kid. And, now I see this as an adult, is the chatter they have when they communicate. And that was the experience he had, was checking on the hog meat at the salt house when he was a kid.
Well, obviously they knew if, they had at least the one coming around the house.
Mm-hmm.
But, just that probably came from having that experience, and no telling what he heard. growing up that he never did tell you all.
Right, exactly.
You know, there's something about the South, especially Mississippi and South Mississippi. If you look at a sightings map, there is a hole over South Mississippi where there's no reported sighting. One, because this is what I believe, there's nothing to report. If someone sees one, it may go to the neighbors. Hey, look out, you know, one of these boogers, which is what they call them, wood boogers, or a booger. We saw a booger around here. You need to watch out. Two, no one knows who to contact. If you contact a sheriff or wildlife officer, that's as far as it's going to go. It's not going into some database where people can, or it wasn't going into some database that people can go back and reference. Now we have the BFRO. As much as people don't care for the BFRO, they've done a lot in taking reports. Now, they don't post every report they take. They document every report they take and count it as a reported, you know, sighting or an encounter. But you're only going to find about 400 or 500 when you go to their website because they cherry pick. You know, if there's anything weird or strange or somebody that they don't really believe, it's not going in there. And I think that's pretty sad. Here's a question. Miss Vicky says, do you think they watch hunters just to steal the kill? That is an interesting question because that has happened to me. Before I was aware of anything was going on, I was already suspicious that there were people coming around messing around out there. But I remember very well one morning, I shot an 8-point. It was a nice 130-inch deer. I don't know what that noise is in the background. It sounds like somebody's got a balloon. Is that one of y'all? Okay. Sorry. It sounds like somebody's squeaking a balloon.
Sorry.
That's okay. I shot him early. Sun had just come up. It's like 7 o'clock in the morning. Nice 8-point. Heard him run. Shot him with a 7mm Magnum right in the side. I used to shoot him through the side and the vitals because I'm not going to eat the ribs anyway. With a 7mm Magnum, they're just not going to live. So heard him run probably 50 feet or so down into the thicket, and I heard him crash. When they crash, when they go down, that's it. It's over. Well, I was greedy. I sat there and waited for another one. Sorry, I'm gonna have to mute you, James. I don't know that noise. I'm just gonna mute y'all while I'm telling this story. That noise is loud. I waited for another one, knowing I had this nice 8-point down here. About 10 o'clock, I get down. I go down. I see where he ran. I see plenty of lung blood, bubbles, pinkish looking, very oxygenated. I see where he went down. I see a pool of blood. No tracks, no blood anywhere else, but no deer. He was completely gone. And I looked for that deer for 3 days. I looked for buzzards because I could at least get his rack. And he was just gone. Now, in these bottoms, Mississippi especially, it's mostly deciduous trees. You get pines up on the high ridges, and in creek beds and bottoms, you'll get oaks and different types of oak trees and hickory trees and beech trees. So there's a lot of leaves, but it stays so stirred up from other animals, possums and armadillos rooting around. You would, unless you were looking for tracks, you wouldn't notice anything. So I think they came and got him, but only because they had the opportunity to, because I didn't get down right then and go get that deer. In 7 years, I know I took at least 60 deer out of there because there were so many in there, just to thin them out and get a healthy population in that area. But I do believe that he was taken. And I don't think they just took it to mess with me. I think they took it to eat it. I think I lost a doe the same way. I shot her from a distance, heard her go down years before, but I didn't go right then and get her. So they had an opportunity to get them. You ever lost a buck James?
No, I haven't. Luckily, everyone that I got, I was able to rack them, or they fell on the lot, and I was able to get them.
That's good. Well, gentlemen, let's see. They sleep it under the rug. Yeah, talking about wildlife officers. Look, if there's a wildlife officer anywhere around here, and I know especially in Florida, I was just reading. I hate this. Mark Zasky, he did something to my computer. I put this up here. This is the hunting. Can't see it. Regulations for the Swanee. It's in any regulations you find in Florida. You're going to see this where it says specific hunting regulations. I'll circle in yellow. Under the hog section, it says there's no taking of swamp or skunk apes. Now, why would they put that in there in the hunting regulations? I've got my theory as to why. I think they're covered that way. If you do happen to shoot one, you're not taking it because it says right here.
Right.
You know, you can't have it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not.
Or they can prosecute you if you do.
Sure. Well, if you ask them, they'll tell you it was in there just as a joke, just to make sure people were actually reading it. That's their cover. But any wildlife officer, game warden in the South, I think if they're not aware, they're not very good at their job. They're just not paying attention, or they're not out there that much. Because these are the people that take these reports that never go anywhere. We talked to a retired FWC officer, said they take about 5 a month. And that was down around, he had worked at in two places. JWC and Mayaka. And they took so many reports in Mayaka, he said they didn't keep up with it. But every officer there had at least taken a dozen sighting reports of skunk ape, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. I think it's all the same thing anywhere you go. I think they just smell a lot worse down there because it's always hot. But that's just what I think. I could be 100% wrong about all that. But it doesn't matter. None of it matters until these officials start coming forward and maybe giving us just an inkling as to why it's being suppressed and hidden. We can guess all we want to. That's all any of it is. Anybody's best guess. Anybody that's even claiming to track these creatures isn't truly tracking them. They may find sign, they may find their tracks in their structures, and may even have get a glimpse or have some kind of experience. But you're not learning anything more. To me, you're not learning anything more than they exist. It's kind of like knowing someone, an individual. We're all different from each other. We're the same, but we're different. And I think it's disingenuous for us to assume that all these creatures are the same, knowing what we hear from all the eyewitnesses. But hey, like I said, that's all my opinion. I give mine all the time, and mine's just like anybody else's. It stinks. So, gentlemen, we have come to the end of our hour. I want to thank you both very much for showing up here. I'm sorry I had to do this by myself.
No problem.
Again,
Brad, no problem.
Well, that's okay. Brad is dealing with a very, very sick puppy. So not a puppy. I think she's 14 years old, but a very sick dog. So you guys, if you can, reach out to him. Let him know you're thinking about him, Brad. If you're watching, we love you, man. Hope to see you back next Friday. And gentlemen, James, Bobby, thank you again for showing up here, talking about your experiences.
No problem. Glad to be here. Thank you.
When you get down there to turkey hunt this year and something happens, you got my number.
Oh, yes.
Sure.
We definitely want to hear about it. But
all right.
Thanks again for joining us. Thanks everybody for joining us here. Bigfoot Odyssey Sunday Encounters. Jackie, Iron Dogger, and the lovely Daniela are going to be, both lovely ladies, by the way, are going to be hosting the show. Not exactly sure who's going to be on there, but it's going to be at 5 o'clock p.m. Central. Hope to see everyone there. Y'all have a good night.
All right. Good night.